Hi, my name is Zach Howe, and I'm going to be doing the data interpretation for the women's soccer team. Just a couple of defining terms here. I'm going to be using the word training monotony a lot. This would be the day-to-day change or lack of change in volume, and a high training monotony means not much change in volume, which means likelihood of injury increases. AC ratio is acute to chronic ratio. We compare the volume of 1 week of work training to 4 weeks of training. That's the chronic portion. And spikes of 15% or more have shown to indicate an increase in injury. Effect size represents the magnitude of or the significance of the change of a given variable. And subjective values are the data pertaining to the experience of the players. So soreness, fatigue, difficulty of the training session, things like that. So as we get started, here we have athlete 1. This athlete has a lot of stress from basically from week 1 to week 2. They are doing a lot of training, a lot of monotonizing training from week 1 to 2. Not a lot of change in volume, and their fatigue consequently spikes also in week 2, meaning they're hitting it too quickly, doing a lot of volume, a lot of the same volume, and they're becoming very worn out and tired. And if that doesn't come back down to normal levels and give them time to rest, they may become overtrained or get injured. Athlete 2, on the other hand, week 9 obviously is a bad spot here. Actually, a lot of this is problematic because their training monotony when it comes to how fast they're sprinting on average with each rep, that sprint duration, or their top speed. They're not getting a lot of change in their day-to-day volume of that in the explosive effort. And then the total distance obviously spikes more. This athlete's living above normal. That's what that black line is normal for training monotony. So here at week 9, we obviously see the potential of this athlete becoming injured. Athlete 3, so here we see we chose some subjective values here because the sleep duration, it is fairly low from 10:14 to 10:21. The sleep duration is higher, and their fatigue from 10:14 to 10:21 is also higher, and their sleep quality is reported on the lower end of things, and consequently they have a spike in AC ratio at week 8. So what this is telling us is week 8, there was a big spike in volume compared to the other weeks. They're struggling, and it looks like they might be reaching an overtraining state because they're sleeping a lot, but it's not very restful sleep, and they're extremely tired whenever they come in. They're gradually rising in their fatigue. Athlete 4 has the same issue as athlete 1 with week 1 and 2. A lot of the same training monotony. The effect size is showing us there's very little change here. They're also reporting higher rating of perceived exertion, or how difficult these training sessions are. It's a whole lot higher, and this is after the week of a lot of volume without a lot of change, meaning they might be becoming overtrained as well. Athlete 5, sorry. What I saw here was at the very end of the season, their training monotony goes and spikes way above normal levels. I wish I could see the AC ratio on week 12 to see if that is a large spike or not. But what really shows it is here, the average sprint distance, the most that they've done throughout the season is about 700 meters. And then all of a sudden on the last week, they're getting over 1,400 meters, close to a mile, which is 1,600. And they're also hitting a high amount of stress here, which means they could potentially become injured. Athlete 6, same as our other athletes. I think it was 1 and 4. A lot of training monotony. Week 2, the effect size shows that we are not changing much at all, and our fatigue and our stress are hitting season highs the weeks after all of this training. So we want to make sure that we're not hitting it too hard too fast in camp, doing too much volume without a lot of variation. Athlete 7, obviously from week 7 to 8, we see a spike in the AC ratio on all three of these variables, session load and time and sprint count. And it's a greater than 15% increase. So that tells us, they might be doing too much this week all of a sudden. And their soreness represents that, as during this week they hit a season high of soreness, which obviously that could lead to an injury if they're extremely sore and increasing their volume. Athlete 8, there's a couple of problems here. Their training monotony, they're living for, when it comes to distance and time of the training sessions, they are living above the line. They are doing a lot and not having much variation at all in their day-to-day training. But especially from week 4 to 5, their AC ratio spikes again above that 15%. So living above the line and then on their monotony and then spiking that significantly means this athlete could be injured right in the middle of the season. Well, actually right at the beginning of the season, which again, then you have to recover and make it to the playoffs. Here, athlete 9, the issue obviously is this spike in the AC ratio from week 7 to 8. We've seen a couple athletes have that issue, so that obviously just shows potential risk of injury. And right here we can actually see it on the graph, this giant spike right here for load and sprint count. So they're doing a lot of volume and a lot of sprinting compared to the next 4 weeks, meaning this athlete, if they don't come down and rest properly, could get hurt. Athlete 10, week 9 and 10, they're living above the line. I mean, even week 2, that early season, they're still above the line on their training monotony for distance and duration. And their stress, though, on the other hand, really starting on 10-7, which I believe is week 7, where they're also above the line, they're steadily creeping up on their stress, and their fatigue is consistently high in the 8, around 8. So, especially here at the end of the season, if this athlete gets hurt, they might not be very useful come playoff time. They might need to recover. They might need to rest. They might be hurt and need to be in the training room. Athlete 11, week 2, early season. A lot of monotony for the session load. And the AC ratio not only confirms day-to-day monotony, but it confirms that there's a lot of volume this week compared to the next week. And we can see that right here. We have this spike on week 1, and then week 2 is pretty high, and then it just goes down. It's still pretty low here. And consequently, the fatigue creeps up until it hits a peak right here. And we actually also don't have any data for that week for training monotony or session load, so they may have been so tired, so beat up, so hurt that they actually were out for a few practices, or we just didn't get their numbers recorded. Same thing with athlete 2. I mean, it's week 2 and 9 and 10. So week 2, they're training monotony. They're not getting a lot of change, and they're hitting it pretty quick. They are actually, especially here later in the season, doing a lot of sprinting. So the training monotony tells us day to day they're not getting a lot of change, and the effect sizes for week 2 and 9 and 10 show us they're getting very little change. But as for the sprint count, they are doing a high number of sprints throughout the year. So this athlete, they have the same issues as others in week 2 with training monotony, and also with the AC ratio, but I didn't put that one on there. But they are indicating little variability from the day-to-day. But something to note here is how this athlete seems to be sprinting more over a greater distance for a longer duration in week 11 of this season. So right here, they are doing a lot more sprinting here than they have. I mean, when it comes to the count, right here, 30 and 1,400 meters over 280 seconds. And it's not surprising that they're hitting their highest fatigue at this point. So this athlete could become injured at the end of the season, meaning, again, they may not be ready for playoffs. They might get hurt or they might be overworked. Athlete 14, their AC ratio spikes in a couple of places above 15%, but mainly from week 1 to 2, meaning a lot of volume. And you can see it right here for their sprint total distance, a lot more volume and actually higher fatigue in week 2 than any other time. So this athlete, again, is putting themselves at risk of injury from doing too much early on in the season. Week 15, athlete 15, excuse me, they have a high training monotony week 1, which that's not much. But then here at like week 2 to 3, they do a lot more training, and we can see that from the spike, but then it goes back to normal. We can also see that their left quad this is the only one where the left quad is actually reaching almost to the upper limits, and the effect size shows that there's not a lot of change right here or right here, but it's this right here. This just leads me to believe this athlete may have been hurt. Maybe their left quad is hurt. They had something happen in the spring or day 1 of camp, and they can't do anything now. So obviously for this athlete, they need to be in the training room if they are hurt. But it just shocks me they have this giant spike in the duration that they're sprinting. Or, they're a goalie and they just don't sprint. Okay, athlete 16, they're showing a couple of different trends. Their training monotony is very high, but in different weeks. So from week 9, which is 10-14, they're high. They are extremely high week 3 to 4, and you can see that given the session load, but especially at week 4, or sorry, not week 4, week 9, they're actually a very low. So that may be good for them to be training, but also it may not be good for them. They may not be getting adequate adaptation, or they might have been overtrained from this middle portion right here. They might have started overreaching and getting tired. But also the fact that here in one of the last weeks of the season, their session load and their total distance spiked tremendously above the rest of the season. So it looks like they might have come off the bench, or they might have been hurt most of the season, because they're reporting very high perceived exertion, touching their upper limits almost every week, meaning maybe they're just not in shape at all, or they've been injured and they haven't had the opportunity to get in shape. Athlete 17, this is where it starts to get kind of difficult because we don't have all the data that we would like to have for these athletes, but here we can see, right here we can see from the subjective data, their sleep quality and fatigue and stress are at their highest during week 2, and their sleep duration is low. So they're having like good deep sleep, but they haven't slept a lot. And their fatigue and their stress is extremely high. And this is the week, again, this is early in the season, and a lot of athletes have had issues this early in the season. So we need to make sure we're not doing too much too fast early. Same thing here. It's week 2 and 3. Their training monotony from week 1 is pretty high. We can see that by the sprint mean duration, how fast each sprint is. And we can see that in week 2, their fatigue and stress again is high, indicating that week 1 and 2 of the season is just a lot on their bodies. I'm going to pause right here, and we will get back into this in just a moment.